Hey everyone, welcome to our live stream for week 3 of RAAus National Safety Month. My name's Marty and I'm the head of flight operations, but for tonight, I'll be your host and we've got an important session lined up for you today. First, a big thank you to Strike Aviation, our sponsors for week 3. They're a dual RAAus CASA approved flight school based at Caboolture Airfield in Queensland. That's demonstrating their commitment to safety by backing this initiative. Today, we're focusing on competency in aviation, a critical topic that's especially relevant for instructors, but valuable for all pilots. Tonight, we've got experienced instructors joining us. With me, Head of Training and Development, excuse me, from RAAus, Neil Schaefer. Neil ensures RAAus training standards and programs are top-notch and aligned with industry's best practice. Peter John is our Senior Aviation Advisor. PJ has a wealth of industry experience, not only in flying, but he has been instrumental with development and implementation of documents and processes. With this, he holds pilot examiner and instructor training approval with Gliding Australia and RAAus. On top of that, he's a tow pilot examiner. We also have Paul Strike, who's a senior instructor and heads up the CASA Part 141 operation. As it happens, Paul is from Strike Aviation, but he's here today via video recording. We'll sign him in a little bit later to share his expertise as an experienced aviation professional. Neil, PJ, and Paul will be sharing insights on what competency means for pilots, with a special focus on instructor competency. They will discuss how RAAus and flight training schools are working to elevate standards. While this session will be particularly beneficial for instructors, all pilots can gain valuable knowledge about the standards they should strive for. We'll be taking questions from the chat later, so feel free to drop these in, but near the end, we'll get back to you on those. Now, Neil is going to dive deeply into defining competency, but here's a brief overview. Competency, the ability to perform a task and duties to a high standard, combining knowledge, skills, and behaviours in aviation. It means a pilot can safely and effectively handle various situations, from routine operations to emergencies, ensuring overall safety and efficiency. All right, let's get this live stream started. Neil, PJ, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much,
Thanks,
Marty.
Marty.
Yeah.
So Neil, probably starting off, would you like to just give a little bit of a quick, brief background on yourself, and then we'll shoot to PJ?
Yeah, well, I think PJ and I have both been in the game a fair while, so brief is probably the least we could do. But look, basically my whole career, in one way or another, has been involved in aviation and nearly 35, 40 years instructing. And, I sat in the assistant head of flight ops role for a number of years, and now I head up the training development for the organisation. So I'm like PJ, we both operate the same gliding club, have done for years, both tow pilots, both instructors, but also clearly senior instructors, pilot examiners, have been CFI with RAAus. And both fly GA aircraft and obviously a whole range. I'm a bit unique in the cohort within the organisation, as I'm also involved in the weight shift microlight side. And on the other side with paragliders, so I do a bit of pretty much broad areas of sport, just don't fly gyrocopters probably, that's about it.
A bit of all-round fun, hey? How about you, PJ?
Thanks, Marty. I've been around aviation for a long time, since I was about 16 years of age, way back in Tasmania. Done some pretty exciting things, culminating in a senior position with CASA before I retired, in an operational role, looking after quite a large part of Australia. So still trying to figure out what retirement is, but the definition and the practicalities of it tend to evade me at the moment. But I'm at the stage of my career now where I feel it privilege and, in fact, almost an obligation to try and give back to those that are following behind us.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's amazing to have people of your caliber, both of you guys, helping out the industry and keeping things rolling. So let's dive into it. Neil, I might throw to you a little bit of diving in a bit more than me, defining competency, I suppose.
Yeah, so I guess, thanks for putting up the slide, Marty. There's we can put a lot of words around competency, but at the end of the day, what is competency? It's about doing something right, and we're talking about in the aviation or the flight experience, flight regime here, doing it consistently. So I'm not just doing it right, doing it to a standard, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, and doing it in both normal and abnormal situations. We can be competent in a very narrow channel, which we often call rote, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're capable in a whole range of areas, which affect, when you add all those things together, that defines what proficiency is. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's trying to keep it as simple as we can. But I'm hoping as we're talking to our flight instructors, we'll have a much better idea of what competency actually is, rather than just a finger in the air and, oh, they were okay on the day type thing. And we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, so that probably brings us a little bit to the idea in here. Key competencies required for recreational pilots. What these are, obviously we've brought them up on the screen, but would you like to talk a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I think that's worthwhile. Look, when we talk about an overall concept like competency, we have to break it down to say, well, what actually is it? So obviously it's a set of skills, and clearly skills are developed through the syllabus of flight training. And there'll be additional skills that you will learn that your instructor in your flight school will give you that aren't necessarily spelled out line by line in a syllabus. Obviously, you also have to have the knowledge, what we often call the underpinning knowledge. And knowledge is something that we all, on this screen tonight, and everyone in the audience, you never stop learning. There's always things to learn. Knowledge can be technical, it can be practical, it can be industry based, and it can be generational. And I think mentoring, and we'll talk more about mentoring from an instructor's point of view, but knowledge is something that's absolutely crucial for anybody who's operating in a flight environment or a maintenance environment for that matter. So the next thing is technique. Obviously you can do something, but when you see somebody hit a tennis ball, anybody can swing a racket, but when you watch somebody who knows what they're doing, they swing it well. And you look at it and you can say they know how to hold a racket. So technique in how we deliver a certain flight skill to arrive at an outcome, that's also important. Of course, we've also got accuracy. And we've probably not focused on accuracy. We introduced a set of flight tolerances very similar to the CASA Part 61 tolerances some time ago, and we've used that in some of our reference information, not so much in the syllabus. The new syllabus has the flight tolerance competencies embedded in it. We'll talk more about that as well. Then we talk about some other things, which, we've talked about human factors, but we've got practical human factors like judgment, decision-making, and behaviours. And behaviour is an important one because we have come from a recreational environment. And some people think, well, I'm a recreational pilot, I can behave differently, or I don't have to behave like an airline captain. It's just fun flying, right? But behaviour defines how we approach everything we do in aviation. And judgment and decision-making can never succeed if we don't have the correct behaviour. And behind that, I might add, the organisation and the industry has to have the correct culture. So these are some of the core elements. There are more than that, and we'll probably talk more about those as we move through. But these are the basic building blocks, and also the assessment areas that we can look at what competency is made up of in anything from a pre-flight right through to a full flight test.
Yeah, so speaking of that, assessing competency, excuse me, what sort of methods do you think, PJ or Neil, do you think that you could actually implement, whether it be down into practical exams or simulations, or what could you put in methods there?
To answer that question, Marty, I think you've got to take guidance from probably 4 or 5 key principles when you're looking at that. When we're doing something and we're critiquing something and even demonstrating, it's got to be valid to the environment we're operating in, valid to the lesson or the element of the lesson that we're delivering at the time, and valid to what we're assessing at any given time. the other thing is it's got to be based on a reliable basis in terms of, when I say reliable, I mean it's got to have some efficacy to it. And that comes from the syllabus of training that has had so much work put into it. And one of the challenges that we have in such a dynamic organisation is the variability of personal interpretation. And that's one of the challenges, that one of the many challenges that we have to deal with. But having said that, we have to be mature enough and experienced enough to understand that we do things and we approach things with a degree of flexibility, because there is not always one size fits all. And in fact, different people learn at different rates. Different age groups learn at different rates. They understand terminology and some of the dynamics of the environment we work in differently. And then that leads into the final point, which is probably one of the most important ones and one of the most challenging ones, or skills to develop, and that's the skill of objectivity. So that we don't allow our biases to influence or interfere with objective outcomes and objective assessment.
Yes.
So would you like to take on from there, Neil?
Yeah, look, everything you say is, and I think the objectivity is really important, particularly from a flight instructor's point of view, where we're often immersed side by side in the training side, and then we have to switch and with full knowledge of the development of a particular pilot candidate for whatever reason, we then have to actually put on an assessment hat and actually look at it. And sometimes that might seem a little strange because, you know, we're playing a bit of Jekyll and Hyde. The other thing I'd like to talk about, and that you mentioned in terms of what makes up these elements, is that they've got to be current and they've got to be authentic. In other words, when I say authentic, if you mentioned being appropriate to the outcome, but authentic as in anybody can go out and throw an aeroplane around the sky, but is that actually what we're going to do in the normal operation? And sometimes we'll extend beyond the box. The other thing is current. You can't be competent at something if you haven't practiced it for a long time. Many people think they have, and many people will have competency in a very narrow channel of operation where that might be 80% autopilot, for example. Some people... So our competency has got to be current, valid, reliable, and appropriate, as you said at the start, to the element of operation. And we talk about all these things in assessment in Module 3 of the Flight Examiner course, which I'm assuming most of our senior instructors and chief instructors and higher approval holders will have already completed online. But,
it's an interesting concept that too, Neil, with talking about the Flight Examiner course. Some of these courses that some of us have done, and so forth, even myself, I think it's time every now and then to go back and revisit that information and just make sure you can bring it back to the top of the mind. We can't remember everything, and we can't always keep putting things into practice. So, you know, directing our people to go back and look at those courses, I think, is a great idea, and other examples of assessment with that. With that being said, team, happy to move over to ingraining the competency. I had a interaction with Paul Strike early today, and so we've got a video of that, which is the interaction there. Unfortunately, Paul couldn't be with us today at this point in time, so we had to pre-record. And so I'll just get our team in the background there. If they can bring that up for us, that would be fantastic. And then after that, we'll have Neil and PJ probably add to this in ingraining competency.
G'day, everybody. Paul Strike here, Head of Operations, Strike Aviation Training. Karen and I are very proud to sponsor another week of safety with our RAAus, and we're very passionate about developing instructors. Creating better pilots starts with creating better instructors, and we ran a seminar earlier this year, which was really, really good. We got some really fabulous people come and integrated and shared a lot of knowledge and experience. And by RAAus identifying that instructors are a pivotal point in the development of good pilots, we're very proud to take up the baton and help create better instructors so that we can raise the standard of pilots and make people safer and create a better environment for everybody to learn and have a really good time flying their airplanes. So, Marty, we're going to talk a bit about the way instructors integrate and raise the standards and competency of pilots.
Yeah, very much so. And thank you once again, Paul. Very much so. Before we dive into ingraining this competency into our students, instructors, and so forth, I love the fact of that safety outcomes that we're looking for, and also enjoying aviation. That's the role of it all. So, in your mind, what would you say an instructor's role would be for ensuring competency or working towards that?
Well, instructor is a very important part of a pilot's journey. A lot of pilots will be significantly influenced by their very first instructor, and they'll set the bar for their attitude, the culture that they'll develop as pilots moving through on their journey. If an instructor instills a high level of standards and demands effective flying and accurate flying, and making the pilots aware of what the expectations and standards are to be met, then they're going to naturally gravitate towards being competent. And then, of course, the other end of the spectrum is if we're just going out to smash holes in the sky, that's probably not the best attitude to be working towards. Do you understand what I mean there?
Yeah, I do, definitely. So what do you reckon some techniques could be for these instructors to effectively teach, or if it's in the case of, say, a CFI, to mentor their instructors that are operating with them?
Yeah, 100%. So we need to think back on our own journey. So if you're an instructor, think back to when you got your RPC. The knowledge you have now as an instructor, reflecting on the knowledge and skill you had when you first got your RPC, you just got a certificate to learn, and you made errors and mistakes, and you survived and hopefully didn't break any bits of the airplane that were important. And you got to look at that same perception as an instructor. Congratulations, you're now an instructor. And it's a authorization to learn. It's an authorization to develop your own skills. We can't do like download how to instruct. We can't put a USB port in the back of our heads and just go, away you go. You need to develop that over time. And CFIs have a great responsibility to ensure that the instructors that they are developing are teaching the right information, the skills. We don't want negative learning. And just by looking at a lot of YouTube, there's a lot of people want to share their experiences, but we need to make sure that it's relevant and safe. So another important part is standardization. So if you're running a flight school that has a number of instructors, they all need to teach the same stuff. And I'm not sort of saying you need to teach effects of controls or how to turn. I'm talking about the little things like, how do I operate the brakes? When do I make that radio call? How do I make that radio call? And so that when the student gets in and flies with 2 or 3 different instructors, they're expected to do the same thing. And it's very frustrating for students who fly with different instructors. And oh, Bob said I do this, and then Peter wants me to do that, and then when I go fly with Jane, she wants me to do this. It's really, really tough. So techniques, there are many, many ways to deliver the same lesson to get the same outcome. And the way that the syllabus is written is it's an outcomes-based requirement. So you need to be able to turn the aircraft. You need to be able to climb the aircraft. But there's many, many ways of achieving that outcome. And instructors need to have a little magic toolbox, because everybody learns at different rates. They learn by different processes. And what works with one student is not going to work with the other student. So if you're trying to teach them, plan A, I teach put the power on and raise the nose, and they can't keep the attitude, then you've got to come up with another way of showing them how to do that. And you need to be creative, and it's an engaging process for instructors.
Yeah, and they've got to learn along the way. So would you have some scenario-based training, or maybe a real-world simulation that you might implement in your flight school or for these training regimes that you're coming up with?
Well, scenario-based training is very, very important because when you're learning to fly up to solo, it's very clinical. We have all of these things that we need to do in order to meet the standard so you can fly the aeroplane when the aeroplane's operating normally. Once you go solo and you start going out and talking about forced landings and precautionary search and advanced stalling and all of those type of lessons, those lessons post-solo are about keeping the aeroplane in the air when things aren't going properly. So just flying around and pulling the power and saying, oh, look, we did an engine failure after takeoff. I pulled the power on him and he put the nose down, and we would have made it because we can't go below 500 feet, so you'll be okay, mate. Well, how about a partial engine failure? A real life scenario is maybe the engine's not going to stop. So how do we manage our energy? And let's talk about, we're not just going to put the nose down because we're going to lose so much altitude, because we still got power on. We've got some power on. So how do we manage that? So scenario-based training is very, very important so that we can expand the students' understanding of the energy state of the aeroplane and adapt how the aeroplane works. And this is another really important thing. Ask the student, how does the trim actually work? What actually happens when the air's flowing over the horizontal stabilizer? How does it create lift? There's a lot of pilots. I do flight reviews for pilots, and I was flying with one today. And after 20 years and 1,000 hours of flying, I explained to him that there's a downforce on the tail. And he goes, yeah, but it's creating lift. The lift always acts up, right? Lift is always acting up. No, it's not necessarily not acting up. So scenario-based training, and by saying, well, what if I want to descend? I can just control the airflow over the tail. So the instructor needs to understand the content themselves and come up with unique and interesting ways of putting the pilots in a scenario where, hey, you've just turned crosswind and you've had a partial engine failure. What are you going to do now? You've just had a circuit breaker pop, so you pushed it back in and all of a sudden there's smoke coming out from behind the dashboard. What are you going to do now? That's not really listed in everything about emergencies, but in the syllabus. But these are things that have happened and can happen very, very quickly.
Yeah, we can't show them everything, but we can surely try and give them that little bit of a taste of whether it be, like you said, reduced power. Lock controls is a really great one, especially if you're talking about you're elevating your trim before. I do that quite regularly. I love the idea of coming on and showing the student that, hey, what happens if in maintenance that screwdriver that the whatever occurred didn't end up coming out and it's now jammed your controls. Now how does your elevator trim operate? And it takes them a little while to work out that it then possibly starts operating the opposite direction. So yeah, these real world scenario situations are exactly what we need to train not only the students, but also the instructors, so they can be ready for it to give this. So that's fantastic. Thank you so very much, Paul. Any other sort of closing out items that you think you want to express to our members for this National Safety Month there?
Just be aware that returning back to the airfield is not always guaranteed if you're not prepared. And one of the biggest things that I find are people not rehearsing an appropriate takeoff safety brief and not thinking ahead of the aeroplane. The startle and surprise factor is, for some people, it's a very personal thing. It's not going to affect everybody exactly the same. It's like how people respond to stress will vary, and some people will be totally incapacitated and other people are just going to take it in their stride. And I got a really interesting story. I was doing a flight with a young fellow, and we were taking off and we were at a critical phase of flight. We're about 45, 50 knots barreling down the runway. And all of a sudden he's just like, oh my God. He took his hands off the controls and started fumbling around to the left. And he's just, oh. And I grabbed the controls, said, my controls. I pulled the throttle back, moved off to the side, and we stopped the aeroplane and got it all under control. And he's finally settling down. What happened? He said, my noise cancelling turned off.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, my controls, we're taxiing back to the hangar now, and we're going to go and have a chat.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. And then another scenario from the other side is we had a Citabria for a while, and it had a single latch on the window just to the left. And when we first got it, it was a little bit loose. And every now and again with the vibration, the window would pop open. And that was a really interesting exercise. Somebody said, are you going to fix that window? I go, well, it only does it on takeoff, but I'm just going to leave it for a little while I just see some different responses. And we had one person take off and the window popped open. And I was ready for the window to pop open, of course, but they let go of the controls and both hands dived out. And you've probably seen that video of that lady in the States where the extra 300 canopy blew open, and she went to go for the canopy and she went, no, I've got to fly the aeroplane. So this student just both hands off the controls, tried to close the window. And I went, my controls, no, let's have a talk about that. You got to fly the aeroplane, aviate, navigate, communicate. That's the goal. And then the very next lesson, another guy, he was Mr. Joe Cool. This is the guy you want to be flying with. So we're barreling down the runway. The window pops open and he's just looking straight ahead. He lifted it off the ground and the hand goes out the window, closes the window, latches it, and then puts his hand back on the throttle. It didn't even faze him. So the startle and surprise is going to make people react. Yeah, some people, their brains will just turn to mush. And if you don't have a plan that's rehearsed, then you better come up with something really, really quick. We had a bird strike with one of our aircraft, touch and go, 200 or 300 feet. It's in the OMS. You can have a read about it. 200 or 300 feet. The bird goes through the propeller, severe vibration, and the instructor took over from the student, landed the aeroplane. And then when we debriefed, he said, you know what, man? I felt the bird hit the aeroplane, and I don't remember a single thing until we pulled up at the end of the runway. It was all just automatic because he'd practiced that takeoff safety brief over and over and over and over. And you know, if you haven't got a takeoff safety brief, you need to make one. The most important thing is to lower the nose to keep the energy in the aeroplane.
Yeah, no, definitely agree there. And look, I really want to say a big, huge thank you to you, Paul, for coming on today and helping out here. And for those that wanting a bit more information, they can check out Strike Aviation Training. Give Paul and the team a call, and I'm sure they're more than happy to give you a hand.
Thanks a lot, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the growing entity that is RAAus, and how we can make people safer and get more people out there flying so we can all enjoy it.
Very much. Thanks again. Always interesting to see yourself twice there. Gentlemen, have you got some comments there, do you think, in relation to Paul's items there, in relating to ingraining competency?
Yeah, Marty, a couple of things I think are really important, particularly from an instructor's point of view. Breaking away from rote, the repetition, and understanding when somebody's behaving from a point of pattern behavior, just through repetition, and particularly if you're assessing somebody, versus are they really competent? So this is this proficiency. You can often see the way somebody does something, whether it configure the aircraft on downwind, the way they're managing the approach, the lack of use of rudder, more over aileron, sort of getting into lateral oscillations, and even down to trimming. You see them trimming the aeroplane before they've actually stabilized the flight path. And these are observations. So I think from how do we ingrain competency? We have to teach instructors, and instructors have to learn how to take in all the visual information that the student is providing them. We're teaching in a visual environment. It shouldn't be about pointing at clocks saying your airspeed's too high or this or that. It should be observing what the pilot or the student is doing and how they're doing it to arrive at the outcome that they need. So we often see a lot of rote behavior. And then when we get into the unknown variables or emergencies, they behave to the rote pattern, but the rote pattern doesn't work. And when we talk about unusual attitudes, this is an absolute classic case where the startle takes over because I'm pulling back, but the nose isn't coming up. Well, no, it won't. And, Paul was here, we could have a long talk about that. But these are the sort of things. So the other thing is observing sustained errors. So one of the key cornerstones of competence is identifying, being situationally aware through workflows, patterns, and available mind space to realize when something's not going right, because a little deviation in airspeed, performance pattern, up at 5,000 feet in cruise, it might put you a mile off track and you get to your next waypoint. But if you're on final approach and there's a gusting 15-knot crosswind, it's going to wreck your day if you haven't got it right. So identifying sustained errors is a really important part, and looking at the idea of fleeting error, a slip where somebody makes a mistake but then corrects it because they know what to do. These are the techniques that a good instructor will ingrain in their student or a pilot so that the pilot then owns that behavior. That's the mirrored mentoring that happens in the cockpit. That's probably all I've got to say, PJ.
Yeah, Neil, I think that is a segue into the difference between competency and proficiency, particularly when you're talking about rote. And we've all experienced the student who turns at a reference point religiously because that's what they've been taught to do. And when we're talking rote is a dynamic in our environment that can be extremely influential, but also extremely dangerous. And proficiency at the opposite end of that spectrum, when we're talking about competency and proficiency, is the ability to handle the dynamic situation based on the competencies that you've learnt, introducing threat and error management and human factors at the same time to manage whatever the scenario is or the circumstances are that you have to deal with at the time.
We'll hopefully be seeing a little bit more of scenario-based training and real-world simulation with the new Ops Manual and Syllabus coming out for Ops 8. Neil, did you want to have a bit of a short discussion on that at this point in time, or leave that for a little bit later?
Look, we can touch on it. I think one of the things that the old syllabus, as PJ said, it's outcome-based. We say turn aeroplane, and I think Paul mentioned it, climb aeroplane, descend aeroplane. But what we don't do is we don't say in what scenarios would we do that? Where would we observe that, and how it's important? So competency variables or range of variables, as CASA call it in their syllabi. This is where we're actually taking, if you think, for example, the concept of GPS and where we are. You can get a tracker that can put you within a meter on the planet through Google Earth. But you can't do that with one satellite. The more satellites you've got triangulating and resolving, you can get down to actually a meter of where you might be on the Earth. And competency variables and assessing them in different scenarios is how we arrive at the same outcome in terms of competency and proficiency. The more ways we actually see one particular skill being used, straighten level in straighten level on downwind, straighten level in another scenario, for example, the more ways we see it, not the more times, the more ways we see it, is one sure way to identify whether we've actually embedded in that pilot's behaviour the correct behaviours, all those things we talked about in competence in slide 2.
Yeah, very much so. When you see a student will always run off one particular runway, as soon as you run them to the next runway, the opposite direction, they're lost. They've got no idea when they need to be doing things. So that different scenarios is key, really. So moving from ingraining competency to expectation versus standards, gentlemen, explanations maybe on expectations and standards in competency-based training?
Kick that off.
Look, I think the elephant in the room is that we talk about a 20-hour syllabus, and I think it's great to sell the concept that you can have a pilot certificate in 20 hours, and I think the problem is that it's great because people like numbers. How much is this hamburger going to cost me? How long is it going to take me to walk that thing? They want an answer because it's drive in, drive out solution. And I think in today's society, with time pressures and people are looking at outcomes, they want to get what they want. It's a, when can I do this? I want to be a pilot. And I think what we've got to do is sort of dismantle that a little bit. And I do it. I have the talk every time a new student comes in, and even a converting pilot for that matter, and say, look, this is about the outcome. The hours have simply been put in as a sort of almost a historical reference that we used in aviation for nearly 60, 70 years. And a lot of it was driven by that they had to have programs where they used to scrub people if they didn't meet the hour requirement. But in a recreational environment, we're trying to, there is financial pressures and financial costs are tied to every hour you fly. But at the end of the day, it's about how do we arrive at the outcome and what's going to happen in terms of you, your currency, your recency, how much work you put in at home, what are the non-practical skills that you can develop, chair flying, your own study at home, what research you do, how you review the debrief. All these things can happen at zero cost per hour. It's just time investment. Some of it can be done with the instructor at the flight school. In busy flight school environments, that's getting very difficult. People come in, do their hour flying, go home. But that recency of thought, this dilution of ideas that have happened in that last lesson that you've just done, you have to go home and practice that and re-visualize it. Great aerobatic pilots, you see them walking around visualizing their routine every time, and they might do it 50 times before they fly. And all they do when they fly is they just follow what they've just mapped in their brain. And the idea of the expectation is that we need to be very clear about what expectations are. And if people have more experience in a certain area, and even converting pilots, like somebody who flies a 3-degree approach on a 1.3 vector, on a constant, on an FMC with autopilot down to 200 feet, it's an altimeter radar, is not going to be able to fly a stabilized visual approach in a 350 kilogram aeroplane on a hot, dusty, windy day. It's a different kettle of fish. So we'll talk more. And so I think with experience, we'll talk about that as well. You can have a lot of experience, but you may not necessarily have a lot of competency. You might in one area or one specific area of operation, but not in all areas that you may or may not need.
Yeah, agree there. And the importance of this with flight schools and flight school delivery, how would a flight school implement competency-based training?
Well, essentially, we've at the moment we've got a syllabus in syllabus 7 where we just ask for the outcome, and we don't talk about how we arrive at the outcome. And so what we do is we rely on instructors to go through and probably teach the way they were taught, and they were taught, and they were taught. And so we've got hand-me-down teaching. And so how we can ensure that instructors actually start to think about competency-based training is to actually look at the metrics behind competency-based training rather than just, this is the way I've always done it. This is the way that I was taught to teach it. And if we look at those things for a start, then we open up our mindset. And of course, we can find a lot of information through research. CASA's got an exceptionally good AC 6109, which talks about assessing competency, and it's also backed up in our flight examiner course, which, as I said before, most of our instructors will have done by now. And also in your instructor training. I think PJ and I are both heavily involved in instructor training, and we can teach you to patter it out and be a robot. And in a few years' time, we might even have robots doing that. But to teach the art of instruction, it takes time and it takes development. And I think PJ covered that before. So I think the first thing is that we need to go back and look at the framework of what resources we've got. We need to go to mentors that have got industry experience in the areas that we need, and actually don't accept if someone tells you that this is the way we're going to teach this. Question why we teach it. I always say to my students, the biggest thing you can learn in your whole aviation life is not what to do, it's why do you do it. Because if you understand the why, then getting back to competency becomes a lot easier. PJ, Marty?
In fact, one of the things when I first engaged with an instructor candidate, Neil, is I have a little bit of a mantra that I go through, but one of the things that I enlighten them with is a comment that was passed on to me when I was in my formative years. That went something along the lines of, this was an elder statesman. He said to me, "Son, welcome to the new world. You've now earned the privilege of answering a question with a question. Every time somebody asks you a question, you can answer it with a question. You now have earned that privilege." And what he's really telling me at that stage was the world that we're operating is such a dynamic environment, and we're dealing with such a broad spectrum in terms of age and experience, that the psychology of instructing and being a good mentor is just as critical to the outcomes of your students as the actual competencies and manipulative skills. And getting back to the 20-hour syllabus, the 20-hour syllabus is a perfect outcome in a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world, and people would bring different experiences on the journey. And very quickly, part of the skill set that you need to develop as an instructor is that ability to weigh up the attitude and the skill sets that the student is bringing, so that we can very quickly determine the journey that they'll embark on, and just in a summative way form an opinion as to how you're going to manage, facilitate and mentor that journey for the student.
And with that being said too, like in a flight school, they can ensure that this consistency and quality in training, so from the top down, they're all continuously doing the same thing. And that basically is going to mean that the CFI has to fly with senior instructors. They have to fly with the instructors, not just give them the keys and say, all right, I'll check the student out once you're finished with them. So definitely need to work on that and ensure that consistency. A little bit over to safety outcomes, and we do have an earlier question there, and we'll try and get back to, if we don't, we'll send out an email to the individuals. But linking between competency and safety in aviation, ultimately our head of safety, Chris Windle, he does look and focus on these components. And this is somewhere where we try as an organisation to focus our attention, hence the reason doing something like this, these live streams, when we see things. Neil, do you sort of see the same lines there with linking between competency and safety?
Oh, clearly. I mean, I think, I've had the benefit of reviewing probably close to 1,000 accident summaries over the last 10 years, and certainly since we've had our occurrence management system. And inevitably, when we see a loss of control event, even a dual one in a training environment, we can bring it down to a competency element, a fundamental element. I didn't recognise the sink. I didn't understand the aircraft had stalled. I thought we had enough airspeed to go around. And you hear some beauties. And then you're not, when you interview some of the pilots, it's about taking them on a journey to say, well, where did the gaps come in your understanding to arrive at this point? And look, it's not always the pilot's fault. Sometimes things happen outside of the best of us, our control. And but I think, as PJ says, we won't know if we're competent until we're truly tested, because the rest of the time we're just getting away with it within a very narrow framework that we've probably set up well to maintain. But it's when it goes pear-shaped, when it turns upside down on us, that's when competence. And you've only got to look at, Sullenberger and the Hudson, and you look at QF32, and you look at other examples where, that are well known. It's when you're not recognised by all the things that you do well. You're recognised by when things go wrong and you manage to get the right outcome. And so safety outcomes tie directly back to competency, but you won't know about that until it's needed. And, I applaud a lot of our pilots. I see the amount of successful partial and full engine failure recoveries where they land the aircraft. Now, the aircraft might get damaged, but where I see that pilots put them down successfully in paddocks off the end of runways and walk away from it, I think it's testament to the culture of training we had when we had unreliable engines. And I think our schools do an exceptionally good job. When it comes to doing other areas like, performance flying and managing, stabilize within tight parameters, if they go on to do a commercial career or something like that, that's probably where we've been a little bit more broad and allowed a less, and we haven't used flight tolerance. We sort of said, oh, well, it was all right. It was a bit bumpy today, so it didn't matter that you were outside circuit height by 150 feet. Well, it does. So I think there's areas of proficiency that we've been very good at. And I think there's areas where we've got a lot we can continue, and it's always continuous work in every area. And when you focus on one, you've got to go back and focus on the other. So I think that's the important thing here, is to realise that it's a moving map, and practical drift is real. We always will deteriorate with lack of currency, lack of recency, and lack of advancement. I think the biggest thing you can do for competence, once you've got a degree, whether it be going solo, is keep doing more and do different things. Go and do an aerobatic rating. Go and do tail wheel. Go and do anything formation. Go and do something different in aviation. That's how you'll test your base competence all the way.
Yeah, different aircraft, different instructors, different locations. That's part of the key one. One of the big call-outs I like to do myself is my flight review with a different flight instructor each time, and flying with multiple locations, multiple aircraft. It's only the way that we're going to be able to help better ourselves as a pilot. And that's, it's going to reduce any errors that we might come across. So making us a safer pilot.
Yeah, PJ talked about proficiency, and I think the thing is that you safety outcomes, as I said, is when it really matters. And the more capable you are of automatically flying that plane without thinking about it, because you've developed a high level of competence and proficiency, then 80 to 90% can be about resolving the problem. I mean, I had a CFI, and I'm about to do his renewal in 2 days' time, and we had a full engine fire. And we worked the CRM together. We went through the problem solving. We were having an engine that was about to fail because it was spewing plastic all over the air cleaners, and we had no electrics. We were straight in approach on a busy runway where they were landing on the opposite runway. But the flying bit and all the actual managing the aircraft just happened naturally.
Yeah.
And I've only got probably 20 hours in the plane. He was flying the plane. I was doing everything else. And it worked. And we put the plane down. Everybody was happy, and we had a smoking plane on the tarmac. But you go back and you say, we debriefed it, but the actual flying bit of it, the thing that we actually did, just worked. It wasn't like we didn't. And you need to have competence, high levels of competence for the one time. And there'll be more than one. All of us have been flying here 30, 40, up to 50 years. We've all had things, and you always go back and go, how could I have done that better? And did I have the capacity? And I don't even remember when I moved that control that way when that happened. It just happens, and people tell you that it's just automatic. And I think that's where competence really shines.
Yeah, and if you're flying with another instructor there, that crew resource management, even stating that before you get flying, state exactly whose role, what's going to happen, put it clear before you get going. That can definitely lead to a better outcome in these times of an emergency. And you're pretty happy there, PJ?
Yeah, I'd like to approach it from a slightly different perspective when we're talking about the syllabus of training in particular and the competencies that are taught and demonstrated. And I'd like to ask what in this forum is somewhat of a rhetorical question, and take us back to why the syllabus is developed and published the way it is. And if we, as instructors, go back and think about it, in very simplistic terms, the first thing we do is stuff at altitude. And we learn all those elements that are critical to the safe control of the aircraft in 3 dimensions. And then eventually we bring it down closer to the ground as we get more competent in those key skills and competencies, or more proficient. And then we bring it closer to the ground where the risk increases. So from a safety perspective, I would like to perhaps leave the message that the syllabus of training is designed for a reason. It's structured the way it is for a reason. And it's in the interest of everybody's safety, both the student and the instructor. And if we start switching some of those elements around, be it innocently or conveniently, then we're starting to challenge the norms that have been built in by our forefathers and their forefathers, in terms of if we get the syllabus of training too far out of whack, and it may be for very good reasons, there can be consequences. So that's the safety message that I would like to leave there.
Really good point, PJ. I mean, I spent a lot of time when I spent 2.5 years working on the new syllabus, and a lot of our higher approvals, CFIs, will have already seen the drafts. But you got to be careful you don't break what's not broken. We have a good syllabus already. We can make it better, and we can actually make sure that it's being delivered better. And that's effectively, so it's a tweaking change in a lot of ways. More time in the upper air work phase rather than rushing to the circuit, more time building that skill so we actually know how to turn an aeroplane, recognize balance and those things. So I think that's the sort of covert change that's probably in the syllabus. Better ways to measure competency, and also more experience in upper air work before we increase the risk, and also the pressure on a pilot.
And that takes us to full circle into where this discussion started from, whereas we can send somebody solo or make a pilot in 20 hours.
Yeah, definitely. And working with that. And if we sort of think about the idea of then that 20 hours, is it experience or is it a competency? What's that, what's that made up of? I suppose, experience sort of refers to the amount of time a pilot has spent flying. And we often refer to that to the hours in the aircraft. And competency, on the other hand, is about the pilot's ability to perform that specific task and handle various flight simulation effectively and safely, regardless of the number of hours that they've flown. So while experience can contribute to developing competency, it doesn't guarantee competency ensures that a pilot has the necessary skills and knowledge to operate an aircraft safely, which is crucial for effective safety and flying. Now, Neil, if you might have a bit of a war story on this, I suppose.
A beauty, actually. And look, it's not to denigrate experience, because experience is valid, right? But I had somebody come to a school and they were looking to get and good on them. They'd finished their career, 22,000 hours in airlines, and were looking to had been involved in some aero club instructing, but wanted to get an RAAus senior instructor rating. And we were flying emergency procedures in the circuit in an aircraft that, to be fair, they'd only done about 15 hours in. And we came in on final, and I pulled power and said carby icing. And because I'd observed over the last 3 circuits, there was a lot of 3-degree approach flying and, fairly accurate profile when everything was right. But there was lack of understanding of inertia of this aircraft, and also managing glide and understanding where the drag curve is, and getting lighter airplanes and a higher drag aircraft, particularly with lower inertia. And this is why we've always had that 5-hour thing, is because they are different. They're lightweight Coke cans, and you have to manage energy. You don't get 100 tons out of a 350 kilogram plane, and a 100-ton aeroplane behaves very differently thrust vectoring and all that. But we came in over the fence, and I could see the thing was behind the drag curve. You could feel, I had thousands of hours in this type of aircraft, and they dumped it on, stalled it from about 10 feet. Now, luckily, they didn't damage the undercarriage. And as they were bouncing towards the left-hand landing lights on the runway, they said, "I stalled it. I can't believe I stalled it." And we were I had to take over because they were berating themselves for stalling an aeroplane. And the funny part is that all that experience didn't help in that situation, because they weren't adaptable. And I think the problem with experience is it reduces adaptability. And not always, but it can dig you a very deep trench in a very narrow level of experience. And I think we have to, a good pilot who's got a lot of experience will know that and will have broken that down. And it's always like the permafrost. You've got to break down those layers of normality, because it's great to be normal when you do the same thing every day. But as we said about competency, it's not about when things go right, it's when things go different or wrong. And it was a great learning exercise for that pilot, and very experienced pilot. I mean, thousands of people would have sat behind that pilot every year, every day. And I think we've all got things to learn. I jumped in and did some formation aerobatic work in the filming for Loss of Control series, and I was in awe of how somebody could reposition an aircraft from a fully developed spin and have it back in formation, ready for the next sequence within about 5 seconds. And hats off to Jeremy if he's listening. But anyway, so these are the sort of things that I think we've all got to aim for, and particularly as instructors, where we have to deal with the uncontrolled environments that sometimes our students will put us in. So our competence has to be at a far greater level, and a far greater level of comfort than any student or any pilot that we fly with.
I have a real world example of that as well, Neil. And this gentleman that I'll talk about when I share the scenario. This gentleman is an ex-British fighter pilot, flew Harriers in the Falkland Wars. He was in combat in the Falkland Wars. He was a 777 captain, I think it was, and he came to learn. And everybody was in awe of this gentleman because of his experience. His reputation preceded him. And he made it very clear to the instructors that were engaging with him that he was concerned. And he was concerned because he believed that in the past, the instructors did not teach him what he needed to learn in the aeroplane and in the dynamic environment he was trying to get new skills in. The biggest concern for him was they would just assume that he knew stuff. And he was concerned that that assumption on their part was going to put both him and them as the instructor in danger.
And there's that humility. And what a great thing. If you have nothing else, I think, I talk about it in a flight instructor reference manual. The 3 characteristics of a good pilot, and certainly a good instructor, is they must be humble, approachable, and creditable. And I think if you go in, for all the students listening tonight, if you don't see those characteristics when you're out flying and looking around to where you're going to learn, then you maybe need to have another look. But they're characteristics that, I see a lot of it out there. We have a lot of really good instructors out there, and they listen and they learn, and they've got some great, fantastic techniques. They don't often talk as much as we do tonight, but they're the 3 characteristics or attributes I think really make a difference. And if you create that learning environment, then competence can build.
They can keep balancing that experience and continuous improvement or competency development if they can. It's kind of the key to it all. I think, gentlemen, we could probably, if you're happy with it, can have a look at the comments there and just working through those. Some, if we can't answer, obviously we'll be looking at following up because it might be another department or so forth that, or to be able to give a better explanation there. And Mark Peters, I think we've already sort of given a bit of an idea that we do assimilate all the information that comes in through our OMS, and ultimately we'll extrapolate, work on, and think of best ways to get that information back out to the industry and to the cohort. And generally speaking, all of the LMSs that go in will generally try and touch base if we can. One of our staff members touches base with individuals if we see that it's necessary and see if we can rectify these problems. But we don't just look at that locality, that one individual. We try and look at the whole if we can and how we're best to give that information. Hence the e-news, other information that's going out, really need to make sure that our cohort are looking at that and paying attention or asking further questions. And so we'll get to those. Simulators, definitely. So the team at Sportsfly there, simulators are definitely a great use for real world scenario training. And if you can set that simulator up to be quite a bit of a replica for the students, but then again, it's those procedures that they need to be working through. So Neil, I know you've spent a lot of time in working in development with the simulators, and they've come a long way, correct?
Look, as you know, at our high approval conference in February this year, we introduced the concept. Brian has been doing a lot of great work in that area with Sportfly. I think there's a huge opportunity for RAAus to integrate simulation training, not just for procedural training, but also for instructor training. I think one of the things that we can do, and it's cost efficient and time efficient, we can sit in and look at how we deliver. And I do hundreds, if not thousands, of renewals and assessments for instructors. And when I show them how to demonstrate by looking out the window, and I show them how they can fly with balance without having to reference other instruments in a turn, they say, I've never been shown that. I've never been shown that. And I think we've got a wealth of knowledge out there. It's just how we tap into it. So, and I think simulation is an incredibly important part, particularly as we move to more complex aircraft and controlled airspace and other things like that. These are areas where simulation can achieve very good outcomes and set the good basics and disciplines that we need to performance fly in all those elements. So watch this space. It's got a Guernsey. We've just got to look at how we actually practically can implement it into the training system as well. Will it reduce hours at this time? Not. But again, it's not about the chase to hours. It's about, can we get a better pilot for a better bang for buck? And I believe we can. And simulation's a big part of that.
Yeah, there's so many things in different ways with virtual reality. It's all changing so quickly. Aviation have got a comment there. Obviously, a lack of patience and tolerance. I had just recently a comment made about an instructor. Now, it's probably a slightly different scenario, but picture this: the student and instructor on finals coming in. They're really early in the training, and for whatever reason that the instructor decided to be doing circuits with this, ultimately the instructor's almost yelling at the student, go round, go round. Well, unfortunately, he obviously hadn't explained to that student what a go-around was. So not only does it come down to this patience and tolerance of students, it really also comes down to that communication. Communication is really key. You need to make sure that the student understands. Because how many times have we all said to our kids, stop? They understand the word stop, but sometimes too, they're not focused. They've got their own little world, what's going on. So every instructor does definitely need to be patient and work with their team or their students. So
aviation does ask about, can we teach these skills like good communication and listening skills? And the answer is yes, you can teach it in instructor training. I spent a lot of work on a specific RAAus instructor syllabus last year, and it will also be released with the new syllabus. And I've already encouraged our schools to use the current instructor syllabus, because we don't have anything other than just go and teach what's in the pilot syllabus. So it talks a lot about delivering a concept in 3 different ways, and I use the term 3 because 3 is a very good thing. If you can, and it's almost organic in our aviation training. We look at something in a normal environment, an abnormal environment, and then in a variable environment. And with communication skills, I actually ask instructor candidates, give me 3 ways that you could explain that concept, and one of them needs to be non-verbal, and they struggle with the non-verbal sometimes, because a picture paints 1,000 words. If you can put your hand in front of the reference, and we've all done it, and said, that's the attitude, that's the picture we're looking at, and not even say a word, the student will see that picture and they will capture it. And that's just one example of how we can communicate, even without words, in a non-verbal environment to get a much more powerful message across to a student.
Yeah, and that sort of brings us to the end of it. Sorry, PJ. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Neil's comment that one of the fundamental elements for embarking on the instructor journey is the principles and methods of instruction. And Neil and I have had some quite extensive discussion with respect to this because we're both passionate about it. The answer to the question, can we teach it, is yes. It's as much an academic as it is an experiential journey. But there is some extremely good material available on the website. CASA has produced a very good AC on PMI. There are a couple of our own flying schools that have excellent PMI courses. And then the FAA has some absolutely brilliant material that is easily accessible with respect to teaching and mentoring and the principles and methods of instruction. So I would commend those to people, particularly if you are interested in this topic and the psychology that goes into and sits behind being a good mentor in an aviation environment.
Yeah, definitely that mentorship. I've really honed myself. I felt comfy in myself starting down that journey of instructor training, but also having other instructors work in and around you. It really makes the difference. So I've enjoyed that journey, and I want to keep going down that path as well. So if we can keep moving there. Otherwise, if that's where everyone's comfortable, gentlemen, I might look at going through our closing out.
Yeah, thanks, Marty.
No worries. And pretty much that brings us to the end, team, of our live stream for week 3 of RAAus National Safety Month. I want to give a huge thank you to Neil, PJ, and Paul for sharing their experiences on competency. Your insights have been invaluable, and I'm sure our viewers have gained a lot from this discussion. A special shout out again to Strike Aviation for sponsoring this week's events. Your support for aviation safety is truly commendable. Additional thanks to our sponsors for National Safety Month for 2024. The previous 3 weeks have definitely been a lot of information and well worth looking into. So a bit of a call out for the code word for this week being competency. It's kind of that word that you're going to need, team. And before driving into next week, be sure to review week 1 and 2 material and enter prize draws for your chance to win over $15,000 worth of prizes. I wish I could enter. We've got another important topic for week 4. We'll be diving into safety management systems for flight training schools and aircraft maintenance. It's going to be a crucial session to all aircraft owners and schools looking to implement or review their SMS, their safety management system. That is a function and it's fit for purpose. So make sure you tune in. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Remember, safety in aviation is everyone's responsibility. Keep learning, stay vigilant, and we'll see you next time.